say the rock star part again, Raija? And yeah, so couple of rock stars from Farmers Conservation Alliance presenting to us tonight. So Raija Bushnell has spent the better part of the last decade working on both water and renewable energy project development and implementation. Combined with an educational background in policy and environmental science, she's contributes a lot of technical and policy knowledge to the Irrigation Modernization project of Farmers Conservation Alliance. And she's had a really interesting background. I enjoyed looking at your past work experience, Raija, in renewable energies and grant writing, development coordinating. We'll talk later.
Awesome.
And Margi Hoffman is also joining us from Farmers Conservation Alliance. She's been working on energy and climate issues for the last 10 years at the local, state, regional, and federal levels. She's a lot of experience collaborating across a broad range of stakeholders, including public and private utilities, environmental, labor, and consumer protection organizations, industrial customers, and business and trade associations. I did want to point out that she has been an energy and climate advisor for both Governors Kitzhaber and Brown. And, doing things like representing the state of Oregon at the International Panel on Climate Change in, was that last year?
No, that was in Lima, Peru. So I can't even remember what year it was, honestly.
Oh, okay, a while back. Anyway, really incredible experience. And so it's really a pleasure to hear from both of you on Farmers Conservation Alliance work.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Alex and the Watershed Council for inviting us to be here. And I just want to start by saying a couple of things. One is that really the basin of Hood River is what FCA was born out of, and a lot of the water challenges there. And FCA would not be who we are today and where we are today without so many of you on the phone. And so I just want to start by expressing our gratitude for all of you who have leaned in and helped us to become the organization that we are today. And I always laugh giving this presentation with Les next to, or on the same screen. He's not sitting next to me, but I'm always like, do you want to just do this one and talk about it? And then I'll take over like when you left and I started. So I want to say thank you, because it really is a collective. We rely very heavily on our strategic partnerships, and especially Cindy and the work that you guys are doing at the Watershed Council on the East Fork Project and others, like just wouldn't happen without you. The other thing I want to do, because Raija's parents are on the phone tonight, and I have the opportunity to actually talk to them, is just to say it's such an honor to work with your daughter, and she is an incredible human being and one of my favorite people that I've ever worked with. So now she's been publicly humiliated, but I thank all of you for that time. So basically, Raija, you can go to the next slide. An overview of the presentation that we are going to give today. We're going to just go a little bit into Farmers Irrigation District or Farmers Conservation Alliance's background, so you can get a sense of the context of who we are and the kind of work that we do in the world. We will go over our irrigation modernization program, and then we'll talk about some of the local irrigation modernization work that we're currently working on in the Hood River Basin that could impact various different people who are on the phone today. I feel weird being like, next slide. So Farmers Conservation Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit. We got our start back in the day when Farmers Irrigation District was installing vertical fish screens to keep fish out of diversion channels. And every year when the runoff would happen on Mount Hood, like huge boulders come down, like I've heard Les talk about whole trees moving down the channel. That was creating a lot of issues in that debris was backing up behind the screens, and it was creating a lot of increase in operation and maintenance costs for the ditch riders who had to go out and clear that, in addition to it not being very beneficial for fish. And so, and then in certain cases, like those diversions would get ripped out entirely, and then you have fish not in the river system, but in the diversion channels. And so Farmers Conservation Alliance was formed. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we were formed to do three things. Actually, let me go back. So Jerry Bryan, who I lovingly refer to as the Nutty Professor, was the district manager at Farmers Irrigation District. And to address this issue, he invented the farmer screen, which you can see on your screen. It's a horizontal fish screen. You can see these in the Hood River Basin, and debris and fish flow right over them. The water that's supposed to be diverted is diverted, and the water that's not goes back into the river along with everything else. And so Farmers Conservation Alliance was formed to do three things. One was to get federal approval to be able to install the fish screens from the National Marine Fisheries Service. The second thing was to take the screen to market. And the third thing was to invest all of the profits realized from the sale of the screen into developing new technologies or programs that would benefit both agriculture and the environment. So everything that we work on, every project that we do at FCA looks through the dual lens of how do we increase agricultural security and how do we enhance environmental benefits. So as part of this work, as we were going, and this is the part that really Les should talk about because he was actually there, but 250-ish people were like, hey, you know, just once you get federal approval, call us up. We want to install the screen. And so FCA like eventually did get federal approval to be able to install the screen. And then like once you have that federal approval, you run into all the other things that exist in developing projects. So landowner X wants this, landowner Y doesn't. Some people had financing, some people didn't. Some people didn't understand the permits that they would need to get in order to install the screen and all of those challenges. And so next screen, or next fish screen, please. It's late. So we have 50 screens installed across 7 Western states. And just last year, we finished the Derby Dam fish screen project, which is the largest fish screen that we worked on. It was a collaborative project with the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe, the Bureau of Reclamation, Truckee Carson Irrigation District, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it connects the last piece of habitat for the Lahontan cutthroat trout. And so the Lahontan cutthroat trout, with the installation of that fish screen at Derby Dam, can now travel the full length of their habitat. The other thing that was really important, that's a foundational piece of the FCA, next slide, Raija, that has always been part of what we wanted to do from the beginning, is launch an FCA foundation, because one way that you can support agriculture and the environment is through the installation of infrastructure. But there are also things that are huge needs, like farm worker housing and dental care and healthcare, to support the people who are actually helping produce crops. And so I'm happy to say that FCA, for the first time last year, was able to make our first $20,000 investment out of the FCA Foundation. And we're really excited to see the foundation grow over the life of our organization. But that's been about 10 years in the making. Next slide. So I think most people on this phone probably know what an irrigation district is, but basically during Manifest Destiny, John Wesley Powell lost the fight about organizing our land ownership around river systems, and we created this cadastral system in the Western United States, and then we formed irrigation districts to move water from points of diversion to farms and ranches so that we could support agriculture across the Western United States. A lot of the irrigation district infrastructure that we work with was really built between the late 1900s and the early 1900s, late 1890s to the early 1900s. And so we have this network of hundreds of thousands of miles of canals snaking throughout the Western United States that actually is pretty similar to like a highway system, but instead of moving people, it's moving water. Next slide. So this is basically a slide of what the irrigation districts look like pre-modernization. So you can see the water is diverted from the river. In most cases, that diversion is screened. A lot of the canals are earthen canals, and then they're pumped and pressurized so that the irrigation infrastructure on farm then disperses the water to the field. Next slide. So a modernized system, we can install fish screen technology at the point of diversion. We can do things like convert open channels to pressurized pipe to reduce the amount of water that's lost to seepage and evapotranspiration. We also can install things like hydroelectric power to generate renewable energy and an earned revenue stream for the irrigation district. And then we can also utilize and maximize on-farm efficiencies by providing gravity pressurized water to farms, as opposed to having to have pumps online to pump that water out of an open channel to the sprinklers. Those are some of the things that we work on. We've talked about maybe we do electric vehicles, and maybe we do this, and maybe we co-locate broadband infrastructure. But in general, this is what a modernized system, water delivery system, looks like. Next slide. So the reason that we focus on main stem irrigation district infrastructure at FCA is that 80% of the surface water in the Western United States moves through these irrigation districts that were constructed over 100 years ago. And they haven't been modernized since that time. So I always talk about our technological advancement is basically like a big plastic pipe in a lot of cases. But there are ways that we can still meet our agricultural needs, but using significantly less water to do so. There are also ways that we can innovate and create water quality enhancements at the tail end of systems, so that we're using natural drains to filter water that's ending up back in river systems and increasing, particularly in the Klamath Basin. I think about Upper Klamath Lake and the sucker problem that we have there, and then tailwater that's either going through the refuge back into the lower Klamath River. And so water quality is also a huge issue that we work on, making sure that as we're modernizing this infrastructure, we're also thinking about impacts to groundwater and other really important things like that. So basically, you can see the slide, but that's why we work on this main stem irrigation district infrastructure. I will say there are a lot of incredible organizations like Ducks Unlimited. Alex is on from the Freshwater Trust, the Intermountain West Joint Venture, that are working a lot with on-farm pieces as well. And so these are really complementary things that we're doing together as a larger collective community. So it's not just about main stem, it's not just about on-farm. There's no magic bullet in how we solve water issues in the Western United States. It's an all of the above strategy. Next slide, please. So basically, through our farmer screen work, we realized if you're just talking to an irrigation district about a farmer screen, it's kind of like showing up with a Porsche tire to a Model T, being like, isn't this great? And yes, it is great. And you can install the farmer screen in districts without modernizing the rest of it. But it just was this moment of pause where we were like, why don't we actually take a step back and look holistically across the entire irrigation district and look at, not just farmer screen or the potential for screening, but look at all of the modernization opportunities that exist in the district, and then understand how modernizing that infrastructure would both benefit agriculture and what are the environmental and community benefits that are also associated with that. So in 2015, we launched our Irrigation Modernization program. I don't know why I'm quoting it. It's actually what we call it. And in that pilot program, we worked with 12 irrigation districts. And really the intent of that program is to do two things. The first thing is that we compile a whole host of technical, we do a data audit, literature review to try to understand all of the technical pieces that are going on in an irrigation district. And we also do extensive stakeholder outreach to really try and understand what the community, like who wakes up and thinks about irrigation district X. And if they do, what do they think about it? And what are those specific projects that they really want that irrigation district to be working on and why? And we roll all of that up into basically an engineering document and a modernization strategy, which says, if you actually want to do what's in this engineering document, here are the opportunities for grant funding or low interest loans or ways that you could self-finance that work. Here are all the permits that you would need to go through, and here are the obtain, and here are the strategic partners that would be interested in working with you on this project. So next slide, Raija. So we basically, through our work, we're working with about 40 irrigation districts, most of whom are in Oregon, but we're also working in California, Nevada, and Montana. We've identified a pipeline of $3 billion in eligible projects over a whole host of different districts. And we've been able to leverage a ton of capital in the Deschutes Basin for these irrigation modernization projects, which were our very earliest districts that were in that pilot program. And so what we've learned is, like, if we can strategically position these districts, that people are really interested in leaning into helping modernize them. And there's a huge collective effort that exists in the Deschutes that includes environmental NGOs, the League of Women Voters, the Sierra Club, Coalition for the Deschutes, the irrigation districts, a lot of the federal and state agencies who are all collectively wanting to see these projects implemented to meet the new habitat conservation plan goals. And so the work that we did with the districts was one key piece to show what capacity do the districts have to contribute to the solution, and where do we also need to look at on-farm or water marketing or some of these other pieces. So it's been, I would argue, fairly successful. That's all I have on my piece. I will now turn it over to the brilliant Raija Bushnell, and then we are happy to take any questions. You're welcome, Raija.
I was gonna say, I just got over the first blush, and now you've made me blush again. Hopefully, can everyone hear me okay? I'm gonna assume so. All right, I apologize ahead of time. I am in our office in the old Shepherd's building, and there can be some background noise. So if you hear anything, apologies ahead of time. So I know Margi just gave you all an overview of FCA's irrigation modernization program and the background on sort of irrigation districts and the work we're doing. And I'm going to take it down a level and talk more specifically about our local projects and East Fork Irrigation District. It's, again, it feels really weird talking about it considering we have John Buckley in the room and Brian Nakamura, all these people that know a whole lot more about it and know a whole lot more about it than me. So I hope I'm able to do it justice. So let me get my, okay, all right. So FCA has, as Margi mentioned, been doing a lot of work across Oregon, but here in the Hood River Basin, there's a few main projects that we're working on currently. The first is Farmers Irrigation District's microgrid study. And again, Les could probably talk to this more than I can, but FID has been a key partner to FCA since the very start. And beyond the study that we're doing with them, we actually generally on an annual basis have irrigation district managers that come up and tour Farmers Irrigation District to see what a modernized system is. So they come up, see the district, and then we have them talk to Les and we say, hey, look, Les is both a district manager and a county commissioner and does all these other things. If you had a perfect house like this, you wouldn't have to do house projects on the weekend either. And so FID has been a great example for us to show what a modernized model of a district looks like. And so right now we're working with FID on a microgrid study. And what the idea of that is it's to see if FID's hydropower plants could be used to create a microgrid to support community resiliency during power outages, and just generally also support local utilities as an ancillary service. I know all of us probably are thinking about power outages after the chilly Christmas where natural gas outage happened. That normally doesn't happen, but there are power outages. And in that case, we want to see whether FID's power plants could provide energy to critical care facilities in the gorge, places like hospitals or nursing homes where it's essential to have that power and electricity for their services to go on. And so we're just at the study process right now, speaking to identify what those critical care facilities are, what their energy use looks like, and what it would take to actually create a microgrid like that. Then the next two projects are with East Fork Irrigation Districts. One project we're doing right now is looking at the hydropower potential. So Margi mentioned that as part of our irrigation modernization program is when we meet with a district, we look with them at what a modernized district could look like. And oftentimes one of those aspects is hydropower. And the hydropower we're talking about is not hydropower that you're putting in the river. It's hydropower that you're connecting to the district's pipe system. So where the district's canal used to be, instead there's a pipe with a hydropower plant. And this is something that we're interested in, not just because it generates renewable electricity, but also it's a way for the district to create revenue to then further modernize it. And so when we've been working with East Fork Irrigation District, we've been also looking to see if there's hydropower potential. And after an initial sort of high level study, we've been taking it a step further, a little further to look at additional engineering and what it would really take to actually get hydropower installed. And then more broadly, or I guess what I'm going to speak to a little bit more in the next few slides is just talking about East Fork Irrigation District's piping and modernization. So I added this slide because I wasn't exactly sure who was going to be on this call. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone knew what East Fork Irrigation District was. Again, I feel ridiculous talking about this when John Buckley himself is here. But for those of you that are new, mom and dad, East Fork Irrigation District is one of the local irrigation districts. It's shown over here in the green. And East Fork Irrigation District serves about 9,600 irrigated acres and 990 patrons. And the district is providing water to those patrons generally from April to September. And the irrigation district starts just up here, right around Parkdale, and diverts water from the East Fork of the Hood River. That water travels around the main canal, and there's about 83 miles of pipe and canal that the district manages. So on the map, the purple is all open canal, and then the orange are areas that the district has already piped, which is amazing considering how much the district has already piped. But what's happening is right now, approximately from where the district diverts water on the East Fork, approximately 18% of that water, or 16.6 cubic feet per second of water that's diverted up here, gets lost to end spills. And end spills are these blue dots shown right here. And what that end spill is, it's when the district diverts water, they need to divert a certain volume to both serve the patrons that are requesting their water, but also to move the water through the system. So as honed in as the district has it, they can't always get the precise amount. And so what happens is that water comes out of the end spill, and it's not going to serve patrons, it's not going to go serve farms, and it's not ending up to be left in the water for fish. So it is water being lost. And that water is about the equivalent of 5,287 acre feet per year. And before I came to work for FCA, I had no clue what that unit was. And I think it's sort of an interesting unit, but what it represents is 1 foot of water across an acre of land. And so I learned what that unit was, and then I still said I have absolutely no clue how much that was, what that unit actually means. And so I did some quick math before this presentation, and 5,287 acre feet is equivalent to about 1.7 billion gallons. And the average person uses 80 to 100 gallons of water a day, which is a lot of water. So that's essentially the same amount of water that's being lost is the equivalent of the amount of water that 47,000 people are using in a year. And so it's a lot of water, and it's a factor from that the district is working with the old system. But the district and its board are aware of this water loss, and they're also aware that water is a scarce resource, and that with climate change, that water is going to become more scarce and less reliable. And so they've been interested in working with the Hood River Watershed Group and with FCA on modernizing their district. And that's what's been really exciting about working with East Fork and with John and the board, is that East Fork's interest in modernizing over the last few years quickly changed from interest into implementation. And so today I'm really excited because we don't just get to talk about their interests, but we also get to talk about the implementation side of things. And so, as I mentioned, FCA has been involved with East Fork Irrigation District, both formally and informally, on and off for the last few years. And what's happened over the last few years is a huge step in East Fork's ability to implement modernization. And Cindy could probably give you the even more accurate story of what I see as this next phase of implementation, but I sort of saw this next stage of implementation beginning around 2017 when Cindy received a grant for piping of the East Side Lateral. And that grant, the funding came through the Watershed, well, that grant's authority came under this federal program called the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Program, which is a mouthful, so we just lovingly call it PL 566 or Public Law 566. And PL 566 is this federal funding program that's managed through the US Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Services. So Cindy applied for and received this grant that is through PL 566. But in order to actually get the funding, there is a lot of hoops to jump through. However, what's exciting is there's also the opportunity to get that funding and also make the district eligible for $25 million of funding through PL 566. And so FCA had been working on a number of PL 566 projects down in the Deschutes Basin. And so we were approached by the Hood River Watershed Group and the district and NRCS to help them with some of the hoop jumping to access this funding and make East Fork eligible for the $25 million. And as I said, nobody likes hoop jumping. Let's just be honest, hoop jumping can sometimes be the worst. But in this case, this hoop jumping is really worth it because $25 million, that eligibility for the district is huge. Generally, when we're talking about irrigation district modernization, irrigation districts can apply for funding, but it comes in chunks starting around, anywhere from 500,000 to 1, 2, 3 million, which is a lot of money. But when you think about the size of districts, chunks like that aren't going to modernize the district in a quick manner. It's why so many of these irrigation districts haven't become fully modernized, such as farmers' irrigation districts. So in this case, jumping through all the hoops to make the district eligible for $25 million was really worth it. And the main hoop to jump for is creating something called a watershed plan environmental assessment. And I'm not going to bore with you guys on what exactly that is, but what it turns out to be is generally a 2-year process and a huge document that meets both the requirements of the PL 566 program, but also the requirements of the federal requirements related to the National Environmental Policy Act. And so around 2017, 2018, FCA and NRCS embarked on this watershed planning process, with my coworker Kate, who's on the phone, as well as Holly Kokoli, taking the lead in developing this watershed plan. And after what was many meetings with Cindy and the district and Brian and John and so many people to make it happen, in the fall of 2020, that watershed plan was authorized and the district became eligible for using the grant that Cindy had received, and also for the $25 million moving forward with a bunch of different projects. So that was a really exciting moment. But what exactly is these projects that I'm talking about? The project that the district will be using with the PL 566 funds is to pipe approximately 17.5 miles of their canals and upgrade a number of the previously piped areas. That previous piped areas is old and sometimes is not able to hold up to the pressurization that new piping causes. And the first group that they are going to be piping is over here in purple in the east side lateral. And so that construction has actually begun this fall, which is really exciting. And that is thanks to the grant that Cindy secured, as well as match funding from the Confederated Tribe of the Warm Springs and Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And what's really exciting is the next phase of that east side lateral will hopefully be coming up soon, because additional funding has been secured for moving forward with that. And in addition to the piping that's going to occur, I think another interesting part of this project is that a sedimentation basin is going to be built. And that's a number of years down the line. But when I first found out about the project, I was like, oh, why sedimentation? And then it all made sense to me. I think we all love walking on the spit. And the spit is thanks to all that lovely sediment coming down the Hood River. But I'm pretty sure all the orchardists on the phone and John can confirm that as much as we like the sediment on the spit, the orchardists don't like the sediment that shows up in their pumps. And so that sedimentation basin is going to help remove all the sediment from water flowing to patrons. So they have to spend less money on filters. Their sprinklers aren't going to clog. There's going to be a number of operation and maintenance benefits coming from that. And so the piping in the sediment basin, completing that project is expected to take around 10 years and be done in 3 different project groups. And that's shown in the brown, the green, and the purple on the screen. And the total project of the cost of the project is $68.7 million. And so you can see why getting something like becoming eligible for the $25 million is a huge chunk compared to moving forward at $1 million, $2 million, $3 million pieces. And when all is said is done is, what do you get for a price tag like that? What are the benefits of the project moving forward? And I think that's one of the most exciting parts about this is there's going to be some really cool benefits to see coming from this project. The first is it'll improve water delivery reliability for the patrons. So now the farmers, orchardists, patrons will be able to get the amount of water they need when they need it. Additionally, when you take water from an open canal and put it into a pipe, it becomes pressurized. And so Margi mentioned that currently farmers have to use pumps to bring their water up to pressure. And so with this project, the patrons are expected to save approximately $319,000 across the district per year by decreasing the amount of electricity they need to use for pumping. And similar to that, there'll be decreased operation and maintenance costs, both for patrons as well as the district. And then a huge benefit from this project is that approximately 16.6 CFS of water that was originally being spilled at the end spills is going to be saved. And of that water, 25% will be used to improve the district's water supply. Climate change is happening. The water supply forecast in the basin is changing with climate change. And right now, every 1 to 10 years, the district has to curtail their water, the water that they deliver to patrons. So they have to cut down on the amount of water that's being delivered. And this results in a decrease in agricultural yields. And so looking across 100 years, the water saved from this project that the district will be using to secure their supply will save approximately $1.36 million per year that otherwise would have been lost because of a decreased agricultural yield. And so these are clearly benefits to agriculture, but as Margi said, these projects that we're interested in, you look at through a dual lens, we want to look at through a dual lens of both agriculture and the environment. And so another really important benefit to this project is that of the 16.6 CFS of water, approximately 12.45 CFS, cubic feet per second of that water is going to be protected in the East Fork of the Hood River. And that water is going to be used to augment stream flows for Chinook, coho salmon, steelhead, bull trout, and other aquatic species. And this is really important for the East Fork of the Hood River because right now low stream flow is a limiting factor for a number of these populations, including coho and Chinook. And with that, I wanted to end up on this last slide because I really think it's these benefits that are both coming to the environment and agriculture that have allowed for a whole array of organizations to coalesce and come together to make these projects possible. It's really helped cement the relationships and funding coming from Confederated Tribes. Warm Springs, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, the work of Cindy and the Hood River Watershed group to really accelerate these projects forward. And I wanted to end on this slide because this photo is it's a very special photo for me, and it's from a ribbon cutting down Tumalo Irrigation District down in the Deschutes Basin. And it's when they first finished their first project that they funded with the same PL 566 dollars that the East Fork Irrigation District is using. And it was the first watershed plan that we had completed. And in this photo from the left to right, you can see the head of this environmental nonprofit. You can see the head of NRCS, who's helped funding PL 566. You can see the district manager, and then you can see Senator Merkley, who has been key to bringing this funding to Oregon. And what I'm really excited about is hopefully to give this presentation in a year or two where I'm going to be able to replace this picture with a similar picture to a East Side ribbon cutting, and that it'll be able to be used to celebrate the similar partnerships that have made that project possible. And also it'll mean that we would be all together, hopefully without masks, and celebrating a superb project that is moving forward in the basin. And so with that, I would just like to say thank you, and we're looking forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Raija and Margi. Go ahead, Chuck.
All right, I'd just like to say perhaps everyone can unmute and we can give a bit of a round of applause for a wonderful presentation, and we will go to the questions then.
Woo, woo!
Okay. Okay, so I'm not quite sure.
Raija, before we do that, Raija, can I ask that you stop sharing your screen because I love to see the people.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Let's see.
I'll note that we've had a little bit of back and forth in the chat. Let's see, Glenn asked about the flows that the screen handles for the Derby Dam project, and Margi replied it was 600 CFS, which is huge, in four modules. And just so you know, Margi also shared a video link where you can check the screen out. So if you open up the chat, you can see that, and anybody can access that.
It stars none other than the Les Perkins. One of many.
Okay.
I just want to, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to share that I can't state enough how incredible and fortunate East Fork Irrigation District, and in turn partners that have been working with EFID, how fortuitous it was that FCA was able to do that watershed plan environmental assessment. I mean, there's no way that just locally among myself and, you know, the irrigation district, that we could have pulled that off. It was hundreds of hours of work on Holly Kekoli's part, Raija, and others at Farmers Conservation Alliance that went into this plan. I mean, how long is the plan, Raija, Holly? Do you guys know approximately? Is it?
I think it's a couple hundred pages.
Couple hundred pages. It's not even, yeah, it's in it, and it's actually a series of a few documents. The plan, EA being the largest, but just the NRC, you know, the expertise that you need to develop an environmental assessment is very specialized, and so it is a huge boon for the district. And you know, as Raija and Margi pointed out, it opens the possibility of up to $25 million in funding, which is just, you know, kind of staggering. So
yeah. I have a question. Good to see you, Margi and Raija, of course. So is the 25 million guaranteed that East Fork can apply for it as long as it goes to the modernization plan as written, or that concept?
So the 25 million is not guaranteed that now that we have a completed watershed plan that they'll automatically get that funding. East Fork Irrigation District will need to apply every year in order to secure the capital, but because they have the watershed plan in place, they don't have to go through the process of, they don't have to go through an onerous like application process. They put together a proposal, they send that into headquarters. And over the last, like, Congress has been appropriating money into this program for the last 5 budget cycles. At the level of $150 million. So whatever 150 times 5 is pretty much the amount of capital that they have available at the federal level. And East Fork has they're probably one of fewer than 10 authorized watershed plans in the United States right now, because they're so darn hard to write. And so there's a very high likelihood that East Fork will be successful in receiving additional rounds of cash, despite it not being a guarantee.
Thanks.
yeah,
It's not all for naught, I promise.
This may be a bad question, but how did you guys get funded to write that big plan? Is it from the PL 566 funds, or is it some other source?
Yeah, so basically the short story on this is that Senator Merkley, who is ranking member, he now potentially will be chair of Ag Appropriations, but at the time was ranking member. And as often happens in Congress, Senator Thad Cochran, who is the chair of the Large Appropriations Committee, woke up and said, I want to do infrastructure projects in my home state. And so his team started looking for programs, and they found the Watershed Planning and Flood Prevention Program, which hadn't been funded for like 10 years. And so Senator Merkley, they needed Senator Merkley to work with them to start appropriating money into that program. And so Senator Merkley was totally on board to do that. And now that I've been talking, I actually forgot your question.
Where did the money come from?
To secure in Oregon, we've been able to secure $145 million in capital from the federal government that shared 75% federal, 25% state.
And I'll just add, so the funding is the Natural Resource Conservation Services funding. And because it's federal funding, they have to do the environmental assessments to comply with NEPA. However, NRCS, similar to a lot of other federal agencies, don't necessarily have the capacity at this time to write the environmental assessments, and so they contract them out.
And did you guys get some Energy Trust of Oregon money as well to sort of flesh out the funding?
Yeah, so Energy Trust of Oregon, we work with their hydropower division. And so if a district looks like they have the potential to develop hydropower projects, then Energy Trust of Oregon will actually fund the bulk of the pre-development work in that district. And so Energy Trust of Oregon has put in a significant amount of capital and their return on investment is like 18 to 1. So what that tells me is that that early pre-development capital is absolutely critical to unlocking and actually making sure we can implement.
So there will be some inline power generation on the East Fork project too?
That I think, yeah, go ahead, Raija.
Oh, I was gonna say for the project that's getting covered by PL $566, inline hydro was not part of that project and not considered as part of that project. If the district chooses to move forward with hydro down the line, that would be a choice they would make, but funding would not come from that PL $566. That would be come from a completely separate funding source.
Hey, Raija, this is Lucius Caldwell. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Hi, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, I had a question for you about, so you said protection of up to like 12.5 CFS in the East Fork as a result of this, and there being fish benefits, which seems pretty straightforward, but I'm curious what time of year those like maximum increased flows would be realized, because like in spring, 12 CFS is probably something like about 1% of flow up in the East Fork. But then in summertime, low flow, that could be like 10%. So I'm just curious if you guys have done any sort of, back of the napkin or more involved look at like what the fish benefits would be in terms of like what that augmentation to flow would be.
Oh man, Lucius, send them in the hard balls.
I can, yeah. Do you, if you
know,
right?
I was about to say I could try and take a stab at that, but I am going to defer both to Holly and Cindy in answering that, since they were more involved in looking at what those effects to stream flows would be.
Give it a shot, Cindy.
Yeah, it's a part of my sales pitch for the grants that I work on on behalf of East Fork. So Lucius, it depends on, and I've gotten these hardball questions from these grant review teams, and so I've had to hone it a little bit. So it of course depends on assuming we're talking about average summer flows, and below the diversion, and John, pipe in here if I'm off, but it can be, what is it below the diversion, do you think, in an average year, in an average summer? Is it, in the 80 CFS ballpark?
We can go anywhere from probably 75 all the way up to 100, but when we're in a drought situation, it could be about 75 to 80, and that's where the benefit will come in.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I'm sorry if it was a hardball question. I wasn't trying to be.
No, but I mean, it's a significant.
Can I give you a simple answer?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Right now, the minimum flow right below the diversion is 15 CFS. Now that's right below the diversion before other inflows come in at the, where it joins the middle fork.
Wow, and we're thinking this 12.5 CFS would be during
it's quite
that
a
low
substantial, flow. And that's during the very lowest flows of the year.
That's amazing.
And in some years, the district's able to do better than 15, but in a lot of years, they have to struggle to provide 15 CFS, which is the current minimum flow by agreement with the tribe. They have to work really hard to, make sure the system as tight as it can to manage to provide 15 CFS, which is also the flow level that is required by the fish passage, by the fish ladder, I believe.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Actually, I'll bump that up a little bit. We have just made an agreement now that we're actually going up to 17 CFS with this year coming on board. And our goal is down the road as we keep piping to go to 23. The goal is to try and get it up to about 27 or 28 down the road. But I think you'll see that when the district is piped for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's until the district gets piped, you're going to just see increments increase.
No,
and I think just to be clear, also, there's a important point here that the bypass channel is between right where the diversion is and what is it, a few hundred yards, John, before the water, there's quite a bit of water that comes back in because it has to pass through a fish screen that's downstream a ways. So there's a bypass channel, and that's, you know, where a minimum of 15 or 17 now and up to 25 in the future, kind of at a minimum. And then farther down, it bumps up. And so it's a fine point, but it's also some, you know, so if you're farther down on the lower East Fork, you're not looking at 20 CFS. You're looking at more than that, like at Woodworth Road Bridge or something like that.
I think the bypass reaches 3,000 feet.
Oh, okay.
I'm not exactly sure if I remember that correctly, but it's more than a few hundred yards.
That's close.
Yeah.
No, and I was simply going to add, taking it a step actually above Lucia's question. I think it's a really important question, and it comes up with all of these modernization projects that we do, because it is expensive to modernize a district, and it's really clear what the benefits are for the patrons of the district, but we really want to make sure that there are those environmental benefits as well. And it's really fascinating seeing how that sort of interacts. So we mentioned that we're doing work down in the Deschutes Basin, and in the Deschutes Basin, there is the Oregon spotted frog, which is an endangered species. And they are currently working under a habitat conservation plan. And in order for the districts to meet the requirements of that HCP, they're having to protect water in stream. And in order to meet that requirement, as well as allow agriculture to occur in places like Madras and Redmond, where they're producing all this carrot seed, irrigation modernization and piping is the solution that's going to allow these districts, along with on-farm, to actually put the water in stream while being able to continue the agriculture that's continuing.
Okay, any other questions of folks?
I have a kind of a question. I recently touched base with BEF on their restoration certificate program, and I know they've funded some stuff in the Deschutes. Do you think that's, I mean, they kind of said it depends on who business is available, but is that something you guys have reached out to, or should I continue to pursue that? Because they that's a program where they have businesses like Coca-Cola or whatever that need water credits, and they'll buy a crediting program. And I know I don't know much about it, but I know they've funded some stuff in the Deschutes. And what are your thoughts on that?
Margi, do you want to field that one, or would you like me to?
You know, I think it's something largely the entities that have been matching the watershed plan so far. The Deschutes Basin received a $10 million. They actually have to go back through the process of asking the legislature for their $10 million lottery bond. Also, Oregon Water Resources Department's 839 program and the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board have been the main sources. I would say we're always, like, we're going to hit those, we're actually already hitting those ceilings in terms of what we need to keep pace with the level of federal investment. So we have not pursued it so far outside of the irrigation districts working on that themselves in the Deschutes, but I would say any and all non-federal potential funding sources to match these projects will be critical in actually, like, it's one thing to secure the cash from the feds. If you secure that cash, but you don't have the non-federal match, it's not, you can't use the money. And so the two pieces are really critical.
And Scott McCullough is at Scott at BEF now? So
I think
Scott,
he is, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's previously worked at FCA, is, you know, completely familiar with irrigation modernization. So I think it's a great way to, great opportunity to check out and pursue.
This is Alex. I can jump in. I have a little familiarity with them. Hey everybody, I'm Alex Johnson. I'm with the Freshwater Trust. I'm also an orchardist here on the East Fork Irrigation District Canal in Mount Hood, Parkdale. But I work regionally, and we interact with BEF quite a bit. Those certificates are, in my understanding, predominantly funded by corporate sustainability purchases or investments or what have you. And so essentially it's big corporations that have water impacts that they're trying to offset, or at the very least kind of buy down. And so we're working with them a lot in the Sacramento Basin. I know they're working a lot in the Colorado River, and certainly their investments in the Deschutes, as far as I know, are connected to like Facebook and some other companies that operate server farms in the Crooked River, for example. And so I definitely think you should investigate. I know that BEF has certainly sold water certificates from watersheds that don't have like corporate impacts to offset. So it's not exactly like, it doesn't have to be exactly geographically connected for corporations to want to make those investments. But it is a little bit of a tougher sell. So I think it's likely that the Hood River Watershed is not a great candidate for kind of the funders that kind of purchase or fund those certificates with BEF, but it's not impossible. For example, I know the Trailblazers a decade ago were paying for water in the Colorado River, which is a pretty far way away from where the Trailblazers play. So anyway, it's not out of the question. It's probably an uphill battle, but I'd be happy to offer some insight or connections to folks at BEF as well, if that's helpful.
I'll give you a call, Alex.
And the one thing I was going to say, Heather, is that through the system improvement plan, through the district's watershed plan, and through their modernization strategy, one of the things that got looked at is like what the benefits are and quantifying those benefits and monetizing those benefits, which is, I think, always key to making any application successful, is being specific. And so I think, you know, the Cindy and the district all have that information that can hopefully, you know, if it is a possibility, make it a really strong application with those numbers, because those are hard to come up with sometimes.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, give 1 second here to somebody to pipe up.
I just want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to all the irrigation districts in the Hood who really, you know, Middle Fork, Farmers, East Fork, D Irrigation District, and Mount Hood Irrigation District that's affiliated with East Fork. Just the remarkable work that those districts have done really over, you know, 30 years. And East Fork has done a large pipeline, you know, the Central Canal Pipeline project was completed about 10 years ago or so. So it's been a long haul, and there's obviously still quite a bit of work to do, but it's incredible. You know, all of you who live here in this basin probably are getting a sense of how fortunate we are to live in a basin where we have such progressive farmers and irrigation districts.
I'll just say to Margi and Raija, FID is ready for their 25 million when you're done with East Fork. So.
Rock on, brother. There's nothing I like more than chasing cash for good projects. If that may be bold.
Well, on behalf of everyone, I thank you both again, and of course everyone, for a great presentation. And really, the magnitude is pretty amazing. And I can remember when the first screen went in, and it's you know, really grown, and it's living true to its vision. So that's really cool. So everyone, one more little for everybody. Thank you. We're going